Welcome back to Inclusive Design 2024, brought to you in partnership with our platinum sponsors, Barrier Break and Intopia, and our gold supporters, Barrier Break, InfoAxia, and Technological. You can follow us on Mastodon, Blue Sky, Twitter, and LinkedIn. If you have questions for the presenters, post them using the ID24 hashtag, or you can use the YouTube chat. We'll gather your questions for our Q&A at the end of the session. A reminder that ID24 is a respectful community, and you can find our code of conduct on the Inclusive Design 24 website. Now, I am delighted to be joined by my guest host, Sarah Higley. Sarah, over to you.
Hi, I am equally delighted to be able to listen to this next session by Charlii Parker and Jacinta Gregory on unlocking insights, moderated versus unmoderated disability UX testing. It's a subject I'm really excited about and interested in. So without further ado, over to you, Charlii and Jacinta.
Thanks so much, Sarah. And thank you to everyone who's joining us today for, as Sarah said, our presentation, Unlocking Insights into Moderated and Unmoderated Disability UX Testing. For those of you who haven't met us before, my name is Jacinta.
And I'm Charlii.
And we are from Intopia. Intopia, if you haven't heard, is the largest team of digital accessibility and equitable design experts in the Southern Hemisphere.
So today we'll be talking about the importance of user experience testing in achieving accessibility. So we'll discuss and compare moderated and unmoderated testing methods, as well as things to consider when conducting research with participants with disabilities.
So why should we be conducting research with people with disabilities? It can create better accessibility and better usability for all users. So when developers and product leads understand accessibility issues, they can implement more effective accessibility solutions. For example, their website will work better and be more usable for people with disabilities, older users, and other target groups. Making websites and web tools more usable for people with a range of disabilities can also improve the general usability for everybody, including people without disabilities. It can help ensure more efficient development. So including users in the development process helps you more efficiently develop accessible products that work well for real users in real situations. And this can help maximize your return on investment in accessibility. When you understand how people use the web and your particular product, you can build accessibility into the appropriate project phases from the beginning, more quickly develop accessibility solutions, make more informed decisions between different options, and avoid wasting time guessing what the solution might be. You will reduce the limit in going back and fixing problems, and then avoid having to make compromises later because you might have waited too long or you weren't aware that there were any accessibility issues with your product. Having a better perspective on accessibility standards and guidelines and other requirements as well can just improve your overall maturity. And when designers and developers see people with disabilities use a product like theirs, you can increase the motivation of your internal team members in understanding accessibility and folding that into your development lifecycle. Understanding the human interaction of aspects of accessibility and going beyond approaching accessibility as only a tick boxing exercise. And designers and developers can see the opportunity for their work and impact lives. When managers and stakeholders share the experiences of people with disabilities using their products, it can help get more resources and budgeting and overall just improve the accessibility understanding within your product. So when approaching UX testing, either with people with disabilities or with people without disabilities, there's often two popular methods which we'll be exploring today.
So the first one we'll be looking at is moderated UX testing. So what is moderated UX testing? Well, as the name suggests, moderated UX testing is a user experience testing method where a facilitator or moderator interacts with participants in real time while they're performing tasks or using a product. So the moderator guides the session. They can ask questions, provide clarification if needed, and gather insights into the user's thought process, pain points, and reactions in real time as the participant interacts with and uses the product. This method allows for deeper exploration of user behaviours and enables follow-up questions that help clarify the participant's experience. Key aspects of moderated UX testing include real-time feedback, so the moderator can immediately ask about specific actions or decisions that the user makes. Can provide guidance, so users can be given instructions or prompted to focus on a particular area of the design. It's more interactive, so the test can be adjusted on the fly based on the user's behaviour or responses. It gives you the opportunity, if a participant makes a comment, you can delve deeper and ask some more questions around that particular interaction. And it also allows for clarification. So if the user is confused, if the task has confused them or the point that they're looking for is confusing, the moderator can step in to explain the aspects of the task, clarify any questions, and get them back on track. So moderated UX testing is often used to uncover detailed insights that might not emerge in unmoderated or self-guided tests. As with any testing method, there is a time and a place for moderated testing, and moderated testing does have some clear advantages and disadvantages. Some of the advantages are immediate feedback and clarification. So in the moderated test, in the session, they can make sure that the intention behind certain comments are clear, and the moderator can probe deeper into that user behaviour. It can also be tailored to individual user needs, especially critical for users with disabilities. But moderated testing is not perfect and does have some disadvantages. One of the main ones is that it's time-consuming and resource-intensive. So moderated user testing's live interactive nature makes it more labour-intensive and costly in terms of both time and resources. You can only run the test based on how many testers you have or how many moderators you have, and usually running in business hours. It can also add potential bias. So while the moderator is present, someone might change the way they interact or change the way they give their feedback. I've had participants who have clearly failed every task they were given, but have given each task an NPS or Net Promoter Score of 9 because they were having a lovely time chatting to me and interacting with me as the moderator. It also requires more logistical planning. So moderated testing is usually done during business hours, as mentioned, and you can only run a limited number of sessions a day. Running a moderated test is quite cognitive. It has quite a high cognitive load. And so you can only run a certain number of tests before the moderator starts to feel a bit of burnout.
On the other hand, we have unmoderated usability testing. In this method, participants complete tasks independently without a facilitator. Because of this, participants can complete their tasks in their own time. Data from unmoderated sessions is often collected using platforms that pick up on positive points and pain points experienced by the participant. AI can also play a role in this space by interpreting what the participant says and providing its insights. If the researcher does not have access to these more advanced tools, then recordings will be reviewed after the session with manual synthesis and note-taking happening by the researcher watching those recordings. But unmoderated testing, while it does have its benefits, over-moderated is not without its limitations. A lot of the benefits for using an unmoderated method fall under efficiency and cost effectiveness, but the downsides can affect the data collection and the insights the researcher can gain. Unmoderated usability testing requires really careful planning and really clear task design. While it's similar to moderated testing, the lack of the facilitator emphasizes the importance of ensuring that there's no ambiguity in the instructions that you provide with your participant. Online tools can assist with recording the sessions, collecting feedback, and managing participant recruitment. Delving deeper into the advantages, unmoderated is scalable and cost-effective. So because you don't have the need for a facilitator or a note taker, you eliminate the cost of their time and any associated expenses like travel or facilities in the case of in-person testing. On the other hand, if you are using a paid platform, those additional costs to consider as well. It's scalable, so if a large number of participants need to be engaged, a researcher can do so at a small cost and increase those number of participants if need be, without the added costs of a facilitator or note taker to consider as well. Participants can complete tasks at a time that suits them, so the constraints of their day-to-day lives, whether or not they're a full-time worker or they have other responsibilities and commitments that might prevent them from participating in research, is eliminated by being able to participate at a time that suits you better. It also means that when participants are taking part in their session, they're doing so at a time when they might be more comfortable, less stressed, rather than having to cram a moderated session in perhaps during working hours when they might have other things that they need to be thinking about as well. And the risk of the moderator's influence is reduced. So when a researcher is running lots of sessions, it can be easy to slip up now and then, maybe unintentionally influence a participant, or it could be a poorly worded follow-up question that misdirects them. By removing the moderator from the session, the risk is eliminated. Now, when we consider unmoderated as well, removing the moderator does have some key disadvantages, like the inability to provide guidance. It means that there is no one there to ensure the participant sticks to the task, provides clarity if they have any questions, or encourages the feedback if the participant forgets to describe their choices and actions. Oftentimes we ask participants to use a think out loud approach when they can. And if you have a particularly quiet participant doing an unmoderated session, there's no one there to encourage the kind of think out loud approach. Being unable to adapt a test in real time means that, if there's a bug or an update to the product or a technical issue that requires a change of testing platform, or even an unexpected user behavior that might require an adjustment, there's no ability to quickly change the task and maybe lead into a different direction if need be. And there's also the high risk of attracting problem participants. If you have recruited for user research before, you know that the participants you can attract can affect the quality of the data that you receive. Unfortunately, in some cases, online money-making activities like paid surveys or unmoderated user testing can attract participants who are mainly interested in getting paid. Or, on the other hand, they could be professional testers in that they don't really represent a real user's experience. And the ease of participating in an online environment, particularly with unmoderated testing, without having the presence of a moderator there, can allow for these kind of problem participants to join, and you won't know that the session wasn't as effective as you would have liked until after the fact.
So to wrap up our comparison, moderated testing provides the opportunity to inquire deeper into user behavior. The moderator can provide guidance, clarity to misunderstandings, and establish trust. Although it is more expensive, especially in-person testing, with preparation time, participant rates, and things like that. But you can do longer sessions, although those longer sessions do require more tasks and scheduling.
On the other side, for unmoderated, as we've said, no opportunity for real-time interaction or to tailor questions for follow-up questions if there's anything that you really wanted to dig down deeper into. As it requires meticulous planning of the scenarios and questions being asked, just to ensure there's no ambiguity, that the participant isn't misled in any way. And typically it is lower cost due to the sessions focusing on one part of the product. So it'll probably be a shorter session where you're just kind of really drilling down into one single thing rather than kind of getting an overall view of the an entire user flow or something like that in a longer user session. And users can complete sessions on their own schedules as well.
So in summary, moderated user testing offers deeper insights, but is more time consuming and expensive. And unmoderated usability testing is faster and cheaper, but may have limited scope. So the best choice depends on your project's specific needs and resources. So now we're moving to disability-focused UX testing. So is there a distinction between standard, regular, general population UX testing and accessibility-focused UX testing? Well, yes and no. As researchers, we focus on a user's ability to interact with designs, websites, and apps. But as a researcher who focuses on accessible usability, there are a number of other considerations that come into play. For example, where do we find our participants? Each participant's individual experience with their disability and their experience and expertise with their assistive technology is also really important when we're choosing our participants. Another thing that researchers who sit in on our sessions often comment on is how leading we are by comparison. So in standard usability testing, the moderator often reads out the question and then sits back and allows the user to move ahead, interjecting occasionally with a few agnostic and very impartial, but not really saying much, so that they don't taint the experience or give perceived bias or confirmation that the participant's on the correct path. However, they also generally have the advantage that they'll have a minimum of 5 participants. And of the 5 participants that they're speaking to for their sessions, all will be of a very similar demographic. Whereas for us, when running a project that focuses on accessible usability, in a standard study, of those 5 participants that we get, 1 to 2 will usually be blind. And if we have 2, they'll often be using different screen readers, or 1 will be on a PC and 1 will be on a mobile device. We'll have 1 person with low vision, 1 person with a dexterity-related disability who might use an alternate input device, 1 person with a cognitive impairment, such as an acquired brain injury, and 1 who is neurodivergent or who might have dyslexia. So we're no longer comparing apples to apples. And for each of these participants, there'll also be considerations that might affect each session. For example, it's fairly standard, as Jacinta mentioned before, to say to a participant, as you work through this task, just think out loud and talk through what's happening. But then try to do that with the added complexity of when a screen reader or speech recognition is being used and your participant is focusing on the task they've been given, or navigating a site that they're not familiar with, listening to their screen reader, or speaking to their Dragon being one of the more common speech recognition software brands out there, or when trying to multitask and that becomes near impossible due to a cognitive disability or impairment, or even just the time on task. So sessions will generally run for an hour, and some of our participants do find that they need a break just to have a rest and to rest their eyes or to rest their minds and their brains before they come back and get onto task. So testing with participants with disability adds an extra layer of complexity onto almost every step.
And when looking at the data collection, we want to focus on understanding errors related to accessibility and usability barriers, rather than focusing on the time it takes for a participant to complete a task or other similar metrics often used in usability testing. As Charlie said, in our standard participant pool for a disability usability testing, we'll often have participants of different demographics, disability types, using different kinds of technologies. And so trying to compare their metrics to each other can be difficult, because in some cases you might have a blind person who's using a screen reader. Maybe it might take them more time to move through a particular website because there's a lot of accessibility barriers that they come up against, or usability barriers that they come up against that weren't otherwise known or aren't really experienced by someone who's not using a screen reader. On the other hand, they might absolutely, go through a website really quickly because it's really well built and really well made for their particular kind of technology. On the other hand as well, tasks would not only concentrate on the usability of the product, but also its accessibility. And while we do focus on the accessibility, we can't also ignore the other important factors of testing the usability of a product. such as their enjoyment of using it or their lack of enjoyment using it, and the other kind of criteria that you often see. Just because we're focusing on accessibility doesn't mean we need to forget about those other elements as well. So when conducting disability UX testing, moderated or unmoderated, it is essential to ensure that the process is inclusive and accessible to people with disabilities. And here are some key considerations. So the accessibility of the testing platform you're choosing to use. You need to ensure that it is both screen reader and screen magnifier compatible, as well as other assistive technologies as well. And just a thing to note too, if you haven't actually had a participant who might use a screen magnifier, for example, for people who use Zoom Text, which is a screen magnifier and screen reader software, the magnification of the screen won't appear on the screen share, even when the participant is using it. So you as an observer won't gain a complete understanding of what is within the participant's view. Additionally, keyboard navigation and alternative inputs. So making sure your platform is compatible with people who only use a keyboard, so people who don't use a mouse, and other alternative inputs as well. And just their general overall accessibility. So ensuring that WCAG 2.2 is being met, and yeah, to create a comfortable and stress-free experience for your participants. And one thing to really consider, as well as for moderated, but probably especially for unmoderated, is clear and concise instructions. So using simple language, avoiding jargon and complex sentence structures, and visual cues. And this is really helpful for people who have barriers to literacy or might even not speak the main language in your particular country or wherever you might be testing from. Using icons or symbols such as an easy read format can be really helpful for those participants. And that just ensures that you're able to include more people with different cognitive disabilities or, as I said, barriers to literacy that otherwise might not be considered for testing. As well as ensuring that whatever platform you're using or the form with which you're providing these instructions to your participants, they are accessible using a text-to-speech feature, such as like in Word, you have a read aloud, or different browsers have different popular plugins that many people like to use. Ensuring diversity in your participant pool, so recruiting participants with a variety of disabilities to ensure that your testing reflects the diversity of your target audience, but then also carefully consider the product being tested. Are the users that you're trying to recruit, do they actually want to use your product, or would they use your product? It's all well and good to want to include more people in your testing, including people with disabilities or who use alternative access and inputs, but also make sure that they, have a vested interest in what that product might be. You might, want to avoid getting someone who's never bought a house before, someone like me, in a refinancing project, because I don't know what that includes. So why include me? In terms of accessibility accommodations, provide necessary accommodations such as sign language interpreters for people who use mainly Auslan for communicating, and transcription or live captioning services for participants who rely on captioning, during a virtual meeting kind of situation. To you, Charlie. Charlie, you're on mute.
I was. Apologies. So really important is accessible task design. So avoid cognitive overload. Keep tasks simple and avoid overwhelming participants with too much information. And that can be when we're setting up a task for a participant, we like to set a scenario and put them into the driver's seat of what they'd be doing in this particular occasion. But if we write a 4-page monologue about who they are and what they're doing and what got them there and why they're doing it and what their motivations are, they actually can forget what the actual task is and what they're trying to do. Consider the assistive technologies as well. So design tasks that consider the variety in which disability might change a participant's interaction style. For example, if you want to get feedback on the suitability of some images, adjust the task for a blind participant by getting feedback on the use of alternative text. Did they find that the alternative text met what your impression of what that image was? Did they pick up the intention of the image from what was in the alternative text, in addition to the suitability of the images? And work on feedback and iteration. So encourage participants to provide feedback on any usability or accessibility barriers that they encounter. In previous sessions, participants with a disability have often encountered usability issues, but can downplay their importance or the effect on their experience. So while it might not be something that is a WCAG failure, it's still important in that person's use of your product. So some of the reasons that they downplay these experiences can be from accommodation fatigue. A lot of people with disability have just given up on telling somebody when something's wrong or when something doesn't work because they're used to not being listened to. So they don't necessarily advocate for solutions due to the lack of improvement that they've seen in previous efforts. We've sat in sessions where something's been built absolutely terribly and we wait for the participant to say, "This is the worst thing I've ever done." And they just go, "Oh, that happens all the time." And it's like, you feel really bad for the person, but the designers have to hear those things. Social desirability bias. So where participants, and this can be regardless of ability or disability, don't feel comfortable expressing negative feelings. They're aware that you're involved in the project somehow, even if you are an independent third party, or you've got observers from the design or the product team there watching. So they don't want to tell you that it's terrible. So you sort of have to draw those experiences out as well. And then there's also negativity bias, where people only want to provide negative feedback. So they might come in and, might be doing some testing for a bank and they've had a terrible experience with banks. So they just want to tell you the whole time the worst experiences that they've had with banks and how this is rubbish and nothing's going to work for them. So their feedback isn't necessarily constructive. So again, you have to be able to extrapolate what their negative feelings are and also take out what they're actually doing in the task and where they're able to complete it successfully or not. And also looking at design iteration. So using the findings from your research will allow you to better understand the accessibility and usability gaps between your users and your product. Some gaps might be bigger than others and require more effort to fill, but in doing so, you'll provide an equitable experience for all of your users. So by following some of these guidelines, you can create a more inclusive and accessible usability or disability UX testing experience for people with disabilities.
All right, so when considering the best practice techniques for conducting research with people with disabilities, firstly, you need to consider what preparations you need to make. Find out who your users are. Through how do they use your product? What do they use it for? What assistive technologies are they using? And what gaps exist in their experience? In terms of what assistive technologies they're using, there's not really any kind of analytics out there that can accurately pick up these details. So in some cases, it's just about going out and reaching out to your community of users and finding out how they interact with your product. Test the accessibility of your recruitment process and testing platform. And this is from the very first point of interaction all the way through to the final points of communication. Many form builders, booking services, and virtual meeting platforms are completely inaccessible to assistive technologies. Often cases, people might be using a form builder that claims to be accessible or a booking service that claims to be accessible, but when you actually get into it and you try to test it, maybe it's technically accessible, but the usability of it just creates too many barriers. And that is really disencouraging for people to want to participate with you in your unmoderated or moderated sessions. It's really important to consider their experience. You want to ensure that when they're up to the point that they're actually testing the product, that they're feeling comfortable, they're feeling included, so that they start at a point of neutrality. Having a tech check with your participants can ensure they're familiar with the technology being used. And that's something that we often have in our practice. A week before our sessions, we'll just catch up with our participant for a quick half-hour virtual meeting just to ensure that their technology works with the platform that we're choosing to use. And if any unknown software updates have occurred, we can plan for them in advance. Ensuring the tasks are relevant and reflective of real-world use cases. So it's important to ground your tasks in the real-world scenarios that are reflective of the participant's experience. So, for example, you might want to test an ID verification flow, and you plan to use a driver's license as the key point of identification, even if it's just dummy data that has been found online from an ID, fake ID kind of location. Don't do anything nefarious with those. Some participants may not drive or even be familiar with this document. So in entering those details into an ID form it doesn't really reflect their real world experience. Proof of ID cards, which are a common form of identification for people without driver's licenses in Australia, are often preferred. And if they're accepted by the particular organization behind the ID verification flow, it's really good to include those kinds of documents if possible. Provide clear instructions and support either in written format for unmoderated or when moderating a session for participants who might prefer a written format. So rather than starting the task and observing where the user goes without interruption, moderating a session with a person with disabilities might require a bit more guidance just to ensure that the accessibility of the product is tested thoroughly. So ensuring, even though a participant might not typically use a search field, for example, on a web page, just to ensure that that participant can use the search field with the tool that they be using, such as a speech recognition tool, and to ensure that it is also accessible to that particular tool that they're using. It might be important just to guide the participant to use that tool for just one single task, just to get an understanding of its usability and to get a little bit of feedback from the participant as well. This might include, leading phrases that lead that participant to that particular point. Not every session or task will involve increased guidance such as that, and the level of guidance needed will be determined by the scope of the study and what you're really trying to achieve within that study.
So also look for both, sorry, I've jumped in. Looking for both common trends and unique challenges. So find common trends that might be difficult due to the diversity of the participant cohort. Despite the diversity, similar issues can still occur. They still might have a different effect on the user depending on their interaction profile. For example, an informational website that has lots of written content and no headings would not be a great experience for a sighted user because they won't necessarily be able to find or follow along with their reading. And for blind screen reader users, they won't be able to navigate the page. So for someone who can see the page, it helps break up the text and makes it easier for the brain to process the visual information, especially for users with cognitive disabilities. And then for blind screen reader users, headings also help to increase comprehension, but also aid navigation, making the web page easier to move around. Focus on the collection of qualitative data. So using qualitative data to support your findings when needed reduces, reduces the significance of the data. In a cohort of 5 participants where one might use a screen reader, one a screen magnifier and another speech recognition, their experiences will differ. So it's really hard to match those experiences, and the quantitative data collected would not be illustrative of their experiences. So qualitative data allows researchers to communicate the experience of participants with disabilities in a way that's impactful. To help give more weight to the experience, individual data can be sourced from places such as the WebAIM survey to see how other users do interact with products, and to help demonstrate how many users may experience similar challenges to the sample tested. Also, by experience as a facilitator running these sessions, you do learn what common challenges are, what common ways of navigating and processing are as well. So you're able to build on your own experience.
So after investigating the differences between moderated and unmoderated, but then also considering the added layer of disability usability testing and testing the accessibility of your products, what can we take away? So it's important to prioritize user-centered design and continuous testing to ensure an equitable and enjoyable digital experience for all users, regardless of ability.
Both moderated and unmoderated testing are valuable tools. They both have their place in the testing life cycle, and each method offers unique insights and benefits.
The combination of both can provide a really comprehensive understanding of accessibility issues. If you have the time to perform a longer moderated study, that's really good for really delving deep into your user flows, into your product, and getting really valuable insights. If you're in a bit more of a time crunch, but you really want to validate an assumption or perhaps quickly test a solution, unmoderated sessions can help you test those before sending them out to the public, just to get ahead of any issues that might occur.
So, which is better? Who knows? But watch this space. We might have to set up an official debate.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Charlie and Jacinta. That was a fantastic talk. Sarah, do we have any questions?
I didn't see any in the YouTube chat, but I have questions. Did you see any on any of the various socials?
I did not see any on the various socials, but I saw a couple great comments in the YouTube channel. Do you want to read those, or do you want me to do that?
Go ahead.
Well, one of them was from, well, one comment was from Stephanie Edwards saying, it's nice to hear Australian accents first. Second, Stephanie also says, excellent point to avoid cognitive overload and allow time for testers to rest during the session. I need to put on my glasses, my assistive technology. And the last comment, because there is a question for you, Sarah. The last comment is from Janine Gatiamulia, and I'm sorry because the text is really, really tiny on my phone. So I'm going to do my best here. Put it really way around back from my arms. So Name says, good call out on the magnifier. Also, sometimes you may not hear the screen reader from there, and listening to the participant screen reader is giving me a good understanding of what they're experiencing.
Yeah, if we have time, we can just delve a little bit deeper into the screen reader. So if you're doing remote sessions, it can be a bit of a challenge sometimes to get the screen reader to come through, depending on your platform and the device that the participant is using. If you're on, or if your participant is, maybe doing a session on their desktop using a website or a product that's on their desktop. If you're using some popular virtual meeting platforms like Zoom or MS Teams as well, it is possible to share sound when you are sharing the screen. It can be a little bit tricky to get to that point, and it's really good if you are really familiar with how a screen reader gets to that point, if that person is not familiar with that platform, just so you can have a bit of guidance around that. And that's where the tech check comes in. So that's one thing that we really value in the tech checks, is just ensuring that the participant is familiar with sharing their screen, and we kind of get over that hurdle if they've never done it before the actual session the next week. So once we actually get to the session, they're feeling more comfortable. It's important to note if they are.
Sorry to jump in,
Sorry,
Jacinta.
Charlie.
It also avoids where these platforms do updates where something worked the last time and no longer works for us. That's something that we often get caught out on in a tech check, where we think something's going to run smoothly, and then we find out that Teams or Zoom has had an update, and then we have to find out new tech fixes for things.
Absolutely. And if they're participating on a mobile device, so if you're testing a mobile app or something like that, that's where it gets a little bit trickier. Screen readers on mobile devices, particularly in a virtual meeting call, and once you're showing a screen, it is an inbuilt function that the volume of the screen reader is reduced, and sharing sound through the device is difficult. So sometimes it's handy if you can also set up a meeting on a desktop or a separate device, have the participant join twice, and get the sound of the screen reader through a second device. And to avoid the looping audio on the device that they're actually conducting the task, you get them to not share the audio from that particular device. So it's just a little tip, a little workaround for anyone out there.
Nice. And we also have a question that came through on the chat from Cindy, which is, what suggestions do you have for trying to convince your stakeholders that data from only 1 or 2 participants with different disabilities is significant, even though it wasn't from many participants?
Stakeholder buy-in is always really tough, especially when looking at accessibility, because quite often they've just spent thousands of dollars on an accessibility audit to make sure that everything's built correctly, and that's sort of where their efforts stop. But any feedback from any user is important. And while you might not be able to get 5 users who are using the same screen reader who give you that same data, you will still get valuable feedback from just that one person, and any input that anybody can give you, especially when they're using assistive technology or have a disability, is worth listening to.
Awesome. And yeah, I have another question. Somebody in chat mentioned that they really like that you mentioned like taking time to avoid cognitive overload and burnout. And I, even before they wrote that, I had a similar question, because I've run 7 hours of moderated interviews in a day and then dissolved and couldn't do anything for
Yes.
the rest of the day. So I was wondering if you had any tips for what to do to avoid that, or like anything you might do to like reset between sessions, or yeah, really any recommendations you might have.
Generally for me, to reset for myself between sessions is walking away from the computer, having some water, making myself a fresh cup of tea, taking some breaths, and just staying off of screen for a little bit, especially for remote sessions where you're staring at the screen intently, you're concentrating on what the participant's saying, you're following on what they're doing, and also remembering where you are within the script or discussion guide yourself. So it is a lot. It's a lot to take in. So stepping away from the computer between sessions, or if you're doing in-person sessions, going for a walk around the block, spacing how your sessions are. Running no more than 3 sessions a day is usually our maximum. We can sometimes do 4, but that does lead to burnout. And then for participants, it's really important, especially when working with participants with disabilities, especially low vision or cognitive difficulties, to just really watch them. And if you feel that they are maybe starting to struggle, offer them to allow a pause. Quite often I'll say, if they have mentioned that their eyes are starting to hurt or they're feeling fatigued, I'll just say that, I'm happy to pause the session now if you like. I'll pause the recording, let them take a break, go away and get a glass of water themselves and come back, and just really be mindful of their feelings and how they are going with the session as well.
I love that tip of being able to pause the session in the middle. That's fantastic advice. Someone else on Zoom just asked if you could repeat the balance of users with disabilities that you generally aim to test with.
So for standard testing, and this generally comes down to a budgetary issue where there's only a small amount of budget. So we have what we call a top 5, and it'll usually be 1 or 2 users who are blind screen reader users, a low vision, somebody who has a dexterity related disability or alternate input, somebody who has a cognitive disability or neurodivergent, and unfortunately, rarely we have deaf participants, and that's again often getting stakeholder buy-in on working with deaf participants when there's no audio within the site. Often it's overlooked, but we do try to encourage it, because if somebody is deaf and sign language is their first language, then it doesn't necessarily translate to written English or written language that the site will be in. So there is still a cognitive load of somebody who is using that site as somebody who is deaf, and English is essentially their second language.
Nice. I think we have 5 more minutes, so maybe time for another question or two. Someone else mentioned that they conduct user research with prototypes before design goes live, mostly on Figma, and they were wondering if you do that kind of testing, how do you do testing before a web page or app goes live?
Yeah, so there's a few options for particularly, I think Figma was a product mentioned there, Figma prototype testing. If you are testing with, say, for example, someone who uses a screen reader, it can be quite limiting. If you kind of want to get an understanding of perhaps the focus order of elements within the page, you can kind of transpose the contents of perhaps if you just focus on one screen or one page, into a Word document and kind of get an understanding of how the participant moves through that information. It won't be the exact same. You won't kind of get the understanding of, how is this marked up? How is this reading? How is this componentry in terms of its WCAG compliance? But it does kind of get you a bit of an understanding of the flow of information and what could be this before actually kind of getting it to that development stage. Another option too is something called the Wizard of Oz method, where the contents of the screen is read out to the participant. So if they are blind and use a screen reader, you can read the content. So you kind of act as a bit of a stand-in screen reader. That's a pretty advanced technique. So it takes a bit of understanding to use a technique like that. And generally, the participant that you have as well, it's quite helpful if they're maybe have a bit of knowledge to have been using a screen reader for a while and just sort of have a good understanding of, how a page might be laid out like that. So it is challenging. In terms of other assistive technologies, certain screen magnifiers might not work, particularly if they use the zoom function in a browser. That can make that a little bit challenging. So if you do kind of want to test with different kinds of assistive technologies that a person with low vision might use, then focusing on something like a Windows magnifier type of technology can be useful in those situations.
Nice. And I think maybe one last question. You talked a little bit about the potential for introducing bias with moderated studies. Do you have something that you do or normally say when a participant asks you if they're doing the right thing or using something correctly, to both avoid bias but also try not to sound like an exam proctor?
I think, Charlie, generally when I hear you moderating, I think you just pass the question back on to the participant. It's like, what do you think?
I'm very good at acting vague. That if someone says, "Oh, is this right?" I'll be like, "Do you think it's right? Do you feel that that's the correct way? Is that the way you would go?" And just turn it back on them. I try not to sound as condescending as I did perhaps just then, but yeah, turning the question back around and also reassuring them, especially working with people with disability. You find that they'll often apologize. They'll be like, "Oh, sorry," and feel that they're getting it wrong. So it's also encouraging them, saying, "No, absolutely, you're doing perfectly fine. You're doing great," and encouraging them through, again, without being condescending.
Sounds like a great life skill in general, to be honest. Awesome. I think back over to Kathleen for the wrap up, and thank you both so much. This was fantastic.
This was a fantastic session, and I personally learned a lot about this. So thank you, Charlie and Jacinta. So If you like this session, hit that YouTube like button, and don't forget you can subscribe to youtube.com/inclusivedesign24 to be kept in the loop on our future events. Inclusive Design is brought to you with thanks to our supporters: Barrier Break, Intopia, InfoAxia, Tetralogical, Intuit, Adrian Roselli LLC, Assistive Labs, the Law Office of Lainey Feingold, Skyscanner, and Vispero. Inclusive Design will be back on the hour with our next session. See you then.